So what is the point of reading so much, or as much as, say, like your typical bookstagrammer reads, 30 or 40 books a year? A lot of people will go through like university or high school, and maybe they'll read a bunch of books on a specific topic and they'll basically quit reading after that. They won't read anymore because they achieved the purpose of their reading. Maybe they wanted to get a finance degree, and so they read a bunch of books in finance for 4 years, textbooks usually, and now they're done. A lot of people don't see the point of continuing to read. So why should we continue to read? Or what is the point of reading so much? I think the best way to start this topic is to start with reasons as to why you should not read so much. And the first one is going to be all-knowing, or just to be like a smarty pants. A lot of people, when they think of someone who reads a lot, also think of someone who's trying to be like a brainiac or knows everything. That is not the case. I would say I read a lot. I mean, I've been reading consistently 20 to 40 books a year for the last 15 years of my life. I started reading at the end of high school, or the middle of high school. And there's definitely books that I've read maybe 10 years ago and I don't remember next to anything inside the book. Maybe I'll remember 1 or 2 key points, but that's about it. I definitely don't know everything, and I'm not ever going to know everything. There's way too many ideas out there, way too many books out there that I cannot read, right? There's something like millions and millions and millions of books, and I'm probably only going to be able to read 1,000 to 2,000 of them if I'm consistent, arguably. So I'm not going to be all-knowing, and I don't think you should read to be all-knowing. I think that's a mistake. Another reason that you might hear is to be smarter than others, or even to be smarter, actually, just in general. I would disagree that reading makes you smarter than others. And I would disagree that reading even makes you smarter. Maybe to a point it does. Maybe like there's some initial gains. But after like your first 30 books, you probably aren't going to like see gains in your smartness or your intelligence. And I don't think reading books makes you smarter than others either. There are definitely lots of people who just do action all the time, and they're just completely action oriented. And as a result, they have a lot more knowledge on things. There's this bit of like a trope that you see with people that they say like you shouldn't be all theory and no action. I've seen tons of people who just read all day and they're really successful in the stock market. They just buy stocks and then they collect their dividends or whatever, and so on and so forth. Those people are all theory. Their life is just fine. And there are people who are all action and their life is just fine. It's a bit of a meme to talk like this. Anyways, the point being is that you can be smarter than other people without having to read, and so I don't think your goal of reading a lot should have the aim of being smarter than others, because I don't think that's what reading a lot is going to do for you. So with those 2 meme takes out of the way, we can actually now discuss the reasons as to why someone should or want to read a lot. So the first reason, obviously, maybe a little bit of a low-hanging fruit here, is to be exposed to like new ways of thinking or ideas or viewpoints continuously throughout your lifespan. But I feel like a lot of people don't get this, and as a result they don't get exposed to these things. A good example might be is modern history. This is actually one of the reasons why I love modern history, is because let's say like I see some Italian guy on the street who like he's straight up Italian, lived in Italy for like 20 years, and I know nothing about their country, okay, or his country. I go and read a book on modern history of Italy, and all of a sudden, my perspective of that person on the street, the Italian person, or just the country of Italy, radically changes, and I see things differently as a result of that. It's one of the reasons why I love modern history books, is it's ancient history, is it's cool, and so on and so forth, but modern history really changes the way that you not only see people, but also how like modern governments relate to one another. You don't really get that from other places. Maybe if you go and talk to the people, this is also another way of doing it. It doesn't have to be just the reading, but modern history books can do this for you, and there's one example of getting different viewpoints or takes from reading. Another great example of getting these like new takes, or basically when you get exposed to a new field or something like this, is international finance. So I've just recently finished an international finance book, maybe like 2 weeks ago. It really altered my perspective of how countries are relating to one another. Before reading this book, I understood that there was more than just the political disagreements that countries have between one another, and there's obviously more to international relations than just political relations. Then I read this international finance book and I realized, yeah, actually international finance is probably like 51% of the equation. If you look at like the Bretton Woods institutions, or institution, and the IMF, these institutions had the goal of stopping countries from engaging in competitive or deliberate devaluations of their currencies, because when countries begin to deliberately devalue their currencies, that increases the value of their exports, and that changes the kind of international trade that is going on, which can mess with the domestic economic goals of a country. As a result of that, the IMF, trying to stabilize currencies from going into like hyperinflation or so on and so forth, tries to basically set policies that say you can't do this or you can't do that. The Bretton Woods institution tried to do it with the gold standard, but as a result of this, you'll see that, for example, the relationship between America and Germany, or America and Europe, is really shaped by international finance. As just one example, Germany gets cheap exports from China, then it sends expensive technology exports to America. And if the euro becomes too inflated to the point where America's purchasing power is much higher, then Germany no longer would accept the kind of basically the other countries in the European Union who are running high inflation because their spending is just really, really bad. They have a really high debt. Germany wouldn't tolerate that anymore. And so you could see how all these relationships can be hinged on international finance. And that's something that I kind of was aware of in the background, but after reading this book, I was like, yeah, actually, this is more on the forefront than I thought it was. It's way more important than political relationships, I would argue, which is why I would say it's 51% of the picture. Another thing that reading does for you, which again is not exclusive to reading, but I'll talk about why it's easier to do when you're reading. But another thing that you can do that you get from reading, especially a lot, is to recognize biases or catch schools of thought. Obviously, in economics, it's very easy when you start seeing people talk about central planning or Keynesian kind of thinking. You'll immediately identify some of their biases or some of their leanings. Whereas if you see someone who's talking maybe a monetarist theorist or kind of decentralized or minimalist forms of government intervention. And the same thing can hold true for if you hear people talk about the word objective or objectivity, or that ideas reference reality versus people who talk about that there is no such thing as reality. You can begin to see how maybe their bias in one school of thought carries over to biases in their other elements of life. Maybe you'll see anarchists have one view of relationships, but also another view of government. And you can kind of basically put people into containers a little bit better as a result of reading, because when you read a lot, you get exposed to a lot of different thinkers. Someone who reads a little bit of philosophy might just get into Aristotle and Plato, maybe touch on Hume and Kant if they stick to it for maybe 6 months or so. Someone who reads a lot of philosophy will come across people like Richard Rorty or John Searle and so on and so forth, right? They'll come across the more modern philosophers, and they'll be able to, as a result, manipulate these ideas and more coherently organize them into buckets so that you can categorize people. So reading can do that for you. Another reason why I like to read a lot of books is to solve problems. Obviously, you're not going to solve every problem in your life all at once, and so you would need to continuously read books if you're going to continuously solve problems. For instance, if you have financial problems, you can solve your financial problems by reading books about those problems. Let's say you don't like the level of your cash flow. Maybe you have some stocks that are growing well. Maybe you have some growth stocks, but you don't have good cash flow. Maybe you can get books on dividend stocks. Maybe you can get books on real estate that produces cash flow. You can look at different books that cover assets that can produce cash flow for you. Or if you have the inverse problem where you have terrible growth but decent cash flow, then you can look at investments that have high growth but low cash flow, okay? Such as growth stocks. You can buy books on that. The same thing holds true for, let's say, if you're struggling with, relationships, okay? You can get books on communication, on different types of attachment, on setting boundaries. There's tons and tons of books on this stuff, and you can solve these problems, or at least kind of develop some general framework on how to tackle these problems by reading books. So that's another benefit of reading a lot of books continuously throughout your life, is when a problem comes up, your immediate kind of response or your strategy to deal with this is to go and look for a book on this. Now, I did say that this is not exclusive to reading, but the reason why it's better done when reading is because these conversations that you're looking for are incredibly nuanced, and in my experience, nuanced conversations are extremely taxing. So to have a conversation that is engaged and following detail and listening to people's arguments rigorously, maybe even digging through sources, is gonna be mentally demanding, not only because there's a social factor, but then there's a critical thinking factor involved. I find it's better to let a writer spend 30 to 100 hours or whatever thinking about some ideas and then putting them into a systematic presentation that we call chapters, and then reading that book carefully. I find that's much easier. Having a nuanced conversation is much easier done in a book than it is in real time. The trade-off, of course, is you can't get that real-time dialogue and feedback. You can't ask the questions. But I nevertheless find that it is easier to do with books because it is so taxing when you do it in person. I will also add on to that, when you disagree with people in person, it seems like the ego is so much more involved. Whereas if you disagree with a book, it doesn't actually matter that you're disagreeing, because the book isn't gonna like yell back at you, right? Basically, like, you don't have to walk on eggshells or manage people's emotions when you're disagreeing with a book. And from my experience, the type of people who are willing to have these nuanced conversations to begin with tend to be like, their social skills aren't the strongest, I'll say. When you're discussing like high-level disagreements in, say, philosophy or finance or biology, these people don't have the best social skills, in my experience. I could be wrong. And as a result, when you do disagree with them, they spurg out a little bit. And I feel like I used to be like that in the beginning of my university years, but I kind of like matured a little bit, and I stopped doing that. I don't spurg out as much anymore. But yeah, so again, books might be better for this kind of conversations, just because it's not going to be as hectic when you do disagree with people as well. And to add on to that as well, like, even when you do go out and see people and you're outside and socializing, most of the people you're going to run into are not the kind of people who want to have these conversations to begin with, okay? So it's going to be really hard to find people who have these conversations. And two, when they're outside, they kind of might just want to relax. So books are better for this, and just in general. I would say stick with books, don't look for people. That's my take. Another reason to read books a lot is a kind of like mastery in a sense. There are some subjects that are just inherently abstract. Kind of manipulating with things physically won't really get you anywhere further on the subject. Let's say, like, for example, metaphysics. These kinds of subjects, these inherently abstract subjects, you can find them all over the place. Can't be mastered unless you do a lot of reading on them. To take the example of metaphysics, I'm at a point in my life where I've like discussed and debated enough metaphysics that I can kind of see the entire territory. And as a result, I have a really nuanced map. And as a result of that, I can also tell you where, like, on this area of the map, it's more rough terrain. On that area of the map, it's easygoing terrain, right? And I can tell you, for instance, that, like, if you say you're a solipsist, you can expect these kinds of reactions. If you say you're a realist, you can expect these kinds of reactions. You kind of get all the stereotypes and the cliches and the predictable responses and counter-arguments that you'll get if you say one thing. You can understand the weaknesses of one argument, so on and so forth. This level of mastery over an intellectual subject like this will only really come through in-depth reading and discussing. You can do it through debating as well, but you're probably going to have to do a lot of reading because people usually discuss the books when it comes to these topics. That only really comes through like consistent long-term effort of reading the actual books that deal with these inherently abstract subjects. And again, yes, you can do it with some debating, but the problem with the debating is the human element there, right? The ego. I would much prefer, in my personal experience, is to go and read the books. To actually read Kant, read Schopenhauer, read Hegel, read all these German idealists if you want to understand German idealism, and then read the opposite of those people after that. Then maybe go and discuss it after. Maybe then that's the best time, once you have like a little bit of foundation in the actual text. So the last thing I will say here on this topic is like the purpose for like the purpose of my life is to be a reader and a writer. And so the reason why I read so much personally is because that's like my purpose in life. I want to write 10 to 15 books, maybe 12. We'll see how it goes. I've already published one, right? And I published that book because I was reading a lot of philosophy. It's on a very niche topic in philosophy called the Munchausen's trilemma that has to do with skepticism and justified true belief. And I was only able to do that because I read a lot of books in philosophy. On top of that, reading really helps you become a better writer because you get exposed to all the different writing styles. The writing style of neuroscience is nothing like the writing style of economics, and the writing style of economics is nothing like the writing style of law. How these people, even these different disciplines, use concepts such as reasonableness or like a reasonable man are completely different. The concept of rationality in law is not quite the same as the concept of rationality in philosophy. Even the concept of rationality as applied in some cognitive neuroscience context is not the same. Getting to read these different fields can really help you see, this is one type of writing style, that's another. And outside of technical fields, even just reading writers in general, they have different writing styles. Karl Marx does not write like Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell does not write like Ralph Waldo Emerson. Michel de Montaigne has a really different attitude in his writing than, say, Thoreau. Reading a lot is really important to become a good writer. It exposes us to all these different writing styles, and in addition to the writing styles, obviously the different ideas. The different types of books that I want to write, some of them will be technical, systematic, and thematic, right? Kind of like a treatise on a particular subject, whereas other ones will just be ideas about life, right? So reading like Marcus Aurelius and, say, Emerson, who kind of write it all over the place on life, might be good for some sets of books, but then having the background knowledge and expertise to read like a neuroscience book and make comments about neuroscience research as it relates to, I don't know, let's say human-computer interaction, it would also require you to read a lot. It's going to be some background knowledge you're going to need, like biochemistry. And to actually read modern papers. So yeah, you have to read a lot if you're going to be a writer, right? Most good writers are, in my experience, avid readers. So as to why you should read a lot in life, or just a lot in general, not like reading, again, 20, 30 books for your like bachelor's degree and then stopping, it's because some of these reasons, right? I think these are the strongest reasons. Obviously, the best one in there is going to be if you want to. Like, if you want to read a lot, then go ahead and do that. Obviously pursue what you want in life. I would say that more importantly are the reasons not to read a lot, like searching truth I think is a bad reason. If you want to know why I think searching truth is a bad reason, you can read my first book. If you want to, I don't know, be smarter than others, that's also a bad reason. Or if you want to be like all-knowing, it's also a bad reason. There are a lot of bad reasons why to do it, and there are some good reasons as well, but I would say make sure you're not following the bad reasons first and foremost, and then you can decide, like for example, if you want to solve all your problems through books by just reading a book about the problem and then applying what you learned. A lot of people like to do that, especially in like the self-help community. A lot of people really like to do that. Yeah, these are some of the reasons. It's up to you at the end of the day. The reason why I do it is because I want to be a really, really good writer, and I think really, really good writers are really, really good readers. But with that being said, bye-bye.